Do you eat a lot of seafood?
No, actually, no, I stopped. No, I stopped a long time ago. I love mussel, for example, but I stopped eating mussel 15 years ago because of what I found inside.
PFAS contamination can come from varied sources. So it can come from the water, can come from the fertilizer, can come from the soil or from the air even.
It can be the food itself or the food packaging material.
Progress has been made to regulate and treat drinking water. What can we advise and do to minimize the exposure to PFAS from food?
Methods that are often used for water have now been moved over to being used for food and food contact.
Contamination for food can come from different sources at different points of the food supply chain. And that makes it far more difficult. Can be at the start, in the middle, or can be just before the consumer is getting the food.
On the terrestrial side, the majority of concern has arisen because of the use of biosolids or the solids derived from sewage sludge that is applied to fields. Probably the most infamous cases are in Maine, where a lot of industrial paper mill pulp has been mixed in with the sludge and has caused huge contamination. From there it gets into the crops and then of course into the animals that are eating those crops. The aquatic side is a little different. So now we're talking freshwater fish and marine fish. There's general contamination because PFAS are everywhere. So even those fish can't escape. Some of the inland lakes and rivers are impacted by point sources too. Things like wastewater treatment plants discharge the effluent into rivers. Some lakes, ponds are affected by nearby point sources that could be military areas, industrial sites, and then fish typically accumulate PFAS to a somewhat higher degree, and then humans eating those fish are exposed again.
The level of contamination in foods is actually quite dramatically different. The FDA has done a really good job over the last 2 to 5 years of testing a large variety of foods from across the food chain or the food web. The one area where we see the most PFAS contamination tends to be in certain seafoods, specifically clams and other seafoods.
Seafood in general would be one group of PFAS contaminated food items, and it depends from which area the food is harvested and also the way how the food is then packed and delivered to the customers.
We've done a bunch of targeted sampling, especially for imported seafoods where we see the highest levels of contamination, to get a better understanding of PFAS role in foods and the interplay between foods and the environment.
If you're using PFAS for food packaging, then it can also leach into the food, affecting, of course, the food that we eat from takeout boxes, pizza boxes, or microwave popcorn bags.
Food packaging has been a major concern because we know it contains PFAS, and we know, of course, a lot of people buy takeout food, take food home from a restaurant, and most of these containers traditionally have relied on PFAS to make sure the paper or cardboard doesn't soak through straight away, so there's repellency of oily stuff and water. And of course, there's also direct exposure for humans. That might be one of the reasons why basically all of us have PFAS in us, even though we don't live next to contaminated sites.
Because we have PFAS contamination in soil, in water, in biosolids, in animal feed, it can affect a lot of the aquatic and terrestrial animals and could affect their products. And also in the US, we have some contamination from the crops. So like the vegetables, the fruits are contaminated. Even the processed foods are contaminated because they are manufactured with water that is contaminated with PFAS.
Usually for the farms, the source is actually the water. So if we know that there is PFAS in water close to the farms, we can guess that there would be PFAS in the meat produced at the farm. So these two items are correlated.
So the water treatments are all centralized, right? But it's different with farms because they have different practices, different soils, different sources of water irrigation, and also their proximity to sources of PFAS contamination is also varied. Like if you're closer to the airports or industrial sites that produce PFAS, then you're more likely to have PFAS contamination in that farm. So it's harder to predict. State and federal governments can mandate the testing for PFAS in the raw materials, in the processing, and also in the final products. And they should also mandate testing in the processing facilities to make sure that there is no PFAS contamination there. And also they can mandate testing in the retail shops after the final products are released in the market.
The difference between a water supply and a food supply system does present different challenges. I think the important thing to remember when we're comparing these two is that one, food is taken from a particular, quite small area compared to where a water supply system may be coming from. Farms can be many sizes, but compared to a watershed, it's still quite small. The other important thing is to consider is that while we know PFASs are sort of ubiquitous in the environment, our testing has shown that, in general, it does not lead to detectable levels of PFAS from most farms in most of the food that we test. Where we have seen PFAS contamination in foods is where we know we have what I'd call a point source contamination problem. So perhaps it's groundwater that's been contaminated by a manufacturing or a military facility nearby where these foams have been used. Or perhaps it's the use of biosolids over a multi-year continuous process. We know that there's a known contamination level. That's where we actually see PFAS ending up in our food supply. So there's not really this need to go out to each farm and test each farm based on the data and the understanding that we currently have. So the challenges are different, but also sort of where that food collected is different.
Generally speaking, we work with states in regarding testing for PFAS at the farm level. Generally speaking, we do test for PFAS at retail. We do have surveys that look specifically at PFAS in many different foods. One program is our FDA's Total Diet Study, where we look at many different foods in different regions of the country. There's 6 different regions. These foods are collected, prepared for consumption, and then analyzed. So in general, when we do testing, we do look at table-ready foods through our Total Diet Study. But we also do other testing through, say, assignments where we go out at retail, or at the border and test foods there as well.
Several farms have been identified because the water from their region was highly contaminated. So there's an indirect way of making sure that at least we catch the most likely problems through water testing. It's not perfect. Clearly, we have only really tested the major water supplies, public water supplies, and then a random private wells. So more water testing might be a roundabout way of making sure we don't miss out on too many farms that might have inadvertently a PFAS problem.
There are certain challenges associated with PFAS in regard to testing and analyzing for PFAS and determining whether there are any safety issues. The first issue is that there are many PFAS out there. Literally thousands of PFAS have been used and are associated with different uses and have been found in the environment. So we have many different PFAS to look at, and having adequate toxicological information regarding these different PFAS can be very challenging. At this point, we do currently have toxicological reference values for 9 different PFAS, and again, there are literally hundreds and probably thousands of PFAS out there. Another challenge involving PFAS testing is that the toxicological reference values suggest that PFAS can be very toxic at low levels. Therefore, having methods to be able to test for PFAS at low levels, at parts per trillion, and sometimes even lower than that, can be very challenging. Another challenge is that PFAS is found in many different foods, and having methods for these many different foods can also be very challenging as well.
Initially, the major focus was drinking water, and EPA stepped up, and we don't know what happens with the new administration, but progress has been made to regulate and treat drinking water. I think the next level item is to use the same knowledge that made us regulate drinking water to apply and find out what can we advise and do to minimize the exposure to PFAS from food.
Many people are familiar with the PFAS methods that are used for drinking water or groundwater. And these are amazing methods. And some do actually work in the food matrices. But foods do offer a significant greater challenge when it comes to getting rid of other interferences or other contaminants, or even in extracting that PFAS material from the food. When looking at foods, we generally use sort of a modified catcher's approach. And so a small amount of food is extracted using catcher solvents and catcher salts. Additional cleanups are done depending on the particular food. And then primarily liquid chromatography, tandem mass spectrometry is used for the detection because we're trying to go to extremely low levels of detection down in the parts per trillion. Generally with food packaging, especially the current food packaging that are just being removed from the markets now, these tend to be what we refer to as sort of short chain PFAS. So the production of them uses a different approach than what people would be traditionally used to that were used 10 or 15 years ago. In this case, a simple extraction doesn't work. And so here at the FDA, we've developed a method that actually uses a hydrolysis of the food packaging material and then a headspace analysis after that in order to screen for those short chain PFAS containing food contact substances on paper. The methods for the food packaging are more qualitative, so we're trying to show the presence or absence of grease-proofing agents on these products. We don't really need to get to a quantitative level, and so a qualitative approach is more efficient and gives us the information we need from a regulatory perspective.
So we do have methods we can use to analyze PFAS. If we think about food, then, for example, with fish, if there is a lipid present in a fish, the process is very complicated and very expensive. So if we have cheaper options, it would be more accessible by a broader range of group. But on the other hand, for example, the other techniques to analyze total fluorine, they can be used for food packaging to screen whether food packaging contains PFAS in general. And then it's more about seeing yes and no, and then the item can be used. Like some fluorine we can later analyze for specific PFAS in the food packaging. Also thinking about industry, it's not only about technology, it's also about frequency. Often they sample their produce to understand if the PFAS contamination is continuing or if it's random.
To ensure that there is regulation for the food supply chain, first can be government or federal institution can force regulation for PFAS in food. That will be one of the first steps to happen. Currently, except in the EU, there is no regulation which are implemented fully for PFAS in food. However, there is some monitoring taking place at federal or local state for PFAS monitoring in food.
With new regulations, and when I say regulations here, I want to be somewhat specific. Sometimes these are guidance, sometimes these are draft guidance, sometimes they're sort of final regulations. But we also, with that, have new methods. And so as those things change, what's the best way for sort of people to follow that, to understand, is actually to follow each of the agencies, or maybe multiple agencies, sort of in the space that you're working. So if you're working in the food space, folks like USDA, EPA, because of some drinking water and other food contact issues that are sort of co-located in both spots, as well as FDA, are places you should be looking for information. Along with visiting EPA or USDA and EPA, really following literature for PFAS and understanding the new methods that are coming out. Here at the FDA, either we put it on our webpage or we put it in the peer-reviewed literature. And often it goes into the peer-reviewed literature when we're talking about methods before it ends up on our website, because we think that's the best place to get information out. And we also want that sort of secondary review process for our methods. There are also government-wide groups. Folks like NOAA or USGS are looking at PFAS. And so following what is coming out from those agencies is really important to following the current not just analytical methods, but the current information on toxicology and on understanding of distribution in the environment, which again leads back to the food supply.
PFAS regulation in Europe are actually currently implemented, and there is a limited number of PFAS which are monitored and regulated. As a difference in the US, there is only monitoring taking place. There is no enforcement of the regulation. Saying that, you can have example where importation can be prohibited due to PFAS contamination.
In Europe, the regulations are based on exposomics and tox data. So we have this EU 2023-915 that regulates 4 PFAS compounds in offal, seafood, meat, and eggs. And they are based on those, the exposomics and tox data. So in the US, we don't have any federal regulations yet, but US FDA has this import alert where they can detain foods that are contaminated with PFAS, for example. So those are based on tox data, on exposure, and other factors. So the difference lies in that we have an enforceable regulation in Europe, but we don't have any federal regulation in the US, but they can detain foods on a case-by-case basis.
When we talk about food packaging, we can get inspired by European countries because there are European regulations for food contacting materials. So there are ways to prevent PFAS moving from food packaging materials to food by preventing PFAS in the food packaging materials. So we can get inspired and adopted similar guidelines here in the US. For the food, the situation is different because we need federal regulation.
So several states have already enacted or are planning to enact bans in food packaging. So we have a number of states doing that already, although there are no federal regulations yet. But states can help by mandating testing for PFAS in food packaging in their final products and also in the raw materials, in the additives that manufacturers use, etc. And they can also test for the biosolids that are used for fertilizer, for the paper that is used to manufacture the packaging. So they can mandate tests in the sources of the food packaging as well as the final food packaging.
The state of Rhode Island has passed a bill phasing out PFAS in food contact materials as of 2025. I think several of the neighboring states have done the same, and there are of course other states. Once there's a critical mass of states with such laws on the books, of course, the incentive will be for suppliers of these materials to just go PFAS free. And then suddenly you protect everybody. I think the reason it passed the state of Rhode Island was because consumer advocacy groups, NGOs, all banded together and said, this is ridiculous. PFAS are dangerous. We don't really need them in food contact materials. We might need them in something else, but certainly not in these kinds of products. So common sense, just ban them. So hopefully other states can follow, and then even without a federal mandate.
Dealing with voluntary withdrawal, as well as how states can interact with the federal government on looking specifically at food packaging. The FDA has jurisdictional authority on food packaging across the entire nation. And if states have questions about what our regulations are or what they aren't, really coming to us and engaging with the FDA on the food packaging regulations and where they stand is really critical first step. Since about 2010, there have been a series of abandonments and withdrawals. And at this point, we've had 35 food contact notifications either withdrawn or removed from the market. And so currently there are no food contact notifications that include PFAS that are currently on the books. The other sort of nuance here is to understand that a food contact notification is specific to that notifier. That means a company comes in and says, we'd like to use this food contact substance or food contact material in sort of either the processing or packaging of food. And the FDA reviews that notification and issues a response to that notification. So when a company voluntarily withdraws their food contact notification, that substance is not still currently available on the market for someone else to use. It is for that notifier specifically. It's a bit of a misnomer to say there are no PFAS regulations because we regulate sort of in a pre-market approach to this area.
What will be next is likely to have even more compound to be monitored. The level of some PFAS will be lower. It will be looked at in different matrices, especially in food, for example. At the minute, there is only kind of regulation in Europe only for a limited number of food, but that is likely to extend. It's likely, for example, to go to as well for animal feed are likely to get regulated in the near future. The scope of the number of PFAS compounds is going to increase with different level, and most probably other contaminants will be discovered in the near future and will be monitored as well.
As we learn more about PFAS, then we can learn more about the tox data, and regulators can enact expanded list of PFAS compounds in various matrices. Another thing is that we need to enforce and monitor the PFAS in food and food products and food contact materials to make sure that the food that we eat are safe.
The genie's out of the bottle, you can't put PFAS back. The problem with chemicals that don't degrade basically means once they're out there, they will keep being somewhere. So we'll have to live with that problem. I think a main challenge is to identify what are the most common exposure pathways and what can you do about them. Can you mitigate them, ban them, remediate them? So drinking water remediation is in place. Food contact materials bans are in place, so hopefully will be taken across many more states. What we do within Rhode Island is, for example, is also to make sure we know if there are particular fish or regions that are more contaminated, so where the state might step in and say, do not fish here. It's not the perfect solution, but it would at least send a message out to the public that if they have a choice, go somewhere else. So I think that's one of the tasks for basically all states. Make sure you understand where you have major exposure routes.
It's for sure not too late, and we are developing technologies for remediation of PFAS from water, drinking water, surface water. So I think that researchers like myself, we have lots of work to do, but we can still get rid of all PFAS which are currently being in the environment.